All right, hi guys. So today we're gonna be talking about complex numbers and powers of I, and we're gonna see what does the word I mean. So this in math, the number I is an actual number. It's not a variable. It is a number that has a value. All right. So I is the unique number for which I equals square root of negative 1. So if I is square root of negative 1, that means I square is I times I, which is square root of negative 1 times square root of negative 1, which will give you negative 1. So in other words, I square is equal to negative 1. Now, I want to say that these are things that you have to memorize, but I would also rather say that these are things that you have to understand, because when you understand them, you will never forget them. But when you memorize them, there is a big chance that you will forget them. So the only thing you need to remember is that I is actually a number. It's a unique number. And the value of I is square root of negative 1, right? I think it's simple to remember that um, basic definition. All right. Um, so let's talk about imaginary numbers. Imaginary number is any number that can be written in the form of a plus bi, where a and b are real numbers, whereas b is not equal to 0. Okay, so first I'd like to, I don't want to really go into the details of the operation of complex numbers. I'd rather now start step by step and start talking about how to do the numbers, the complex numbers. So let's say I'm going to have example number one. Example one. If I have square root of, I'm going to start with the easy one, negative 4. We're not used to seeing any negatives inside the radical, right? So this is, in other words, the same as square root of 4 times square root of negative 1. Because remember, negative 4 is the same as negative 1 times 4. So when I say square root of negative 4, it's as if I'm saying square root of negative 1 times square root of 4. Or it's the same as square root of 4 times square root of negative 1. Remember, they all 4 times 1 or 1 times 4, they're both the same. All right, so let's see how we can solve this one. Square root of 4, we already know that square root of 4 is 2 times, we know that square root of negative 1 is I. So in other words, square root of negative 4 is 2I. And that's your answer. Right? We're going to do another example. Example 2. Let's do square root of negative 8. All right? Square root of negative 8 is what? So first, let's break this down. Since I have a negative inside the square root, we do not like to see this. We do not want to see a negative inside the square root. So we're going to break it down. We're going to say, but I know that negative 8 is 8 times negative 1, which means square root of negative 8 is square root of 8 times square root of negative 1. All right? So this square root of negative 8 is square root of negative 8. Negative 8 is what? So we're going to break this down into square root of 8 times square root of negative 1. Remember, before we talked about how to find the square root of numbers. So we're going to find the smallest number I can divide 8 by. And the smallest number is 2. Got 4. 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Again, 2, 1. So I need to group them in groups of 2 because this is a square root. So that would be 2 squared times 2 equals 8. So in other words, this would be, I'm going to do it step by step. 2 squared times 2, and then times square root of negative 1. So we know that this will go outside the radical because square root of 2 squared is 2. So that would be 2. And then the square root of 2 is going to stay inside. And then what do we have for I? We know that the square root of negative 1 is always I. So I'm going to replace this with an I. All right? But when I look at it mathematically, we don't like to see that form. We'd rather see all the numbers next to each other, and then after them, we write the radicals. So in other words, all I'm going to do is I'm going to move this I over here. It's not going to change the value of this whole thing. All it's going to do is just going to look. That's how the format to write these kind of questions. All right, so I got 2i square root of 2. All right, let's try another example. So let's do example 3. And this is going to be the U try part. So please try to pause the video and try to solve it on your own. All right, let's think of, I want to say, square root of, let's do negative 32. Square root of negative 32 is a question mark. So the first thing I will think of, I will say, oh, I have a negative inside the square root. That automatically tells me that I will have an imaginary number that has an I in it. All right, so again, square root of negative 32 is the same as square root of negative 1 times square root of 32. All right, now how do we do the square root of 32? Just going to do it here in the margin. 32, smallest number I can divide it with is 2. 32 divided by 2. I know some people, they like to do the tree method, and that's fine too. I got 2, 8, 2, 4, 2, 2, and 2, 1. Now I want to group them in groups of 2. So let's see how many groups of 2 I can get out of this. So in other words, 32 is 2 squared times 2 squared times 2. And I also know that the square root of I is square root of negative 1 is I. And then the square root of 32 is square root of 2 squared times 2 squared times 2. Now, we talked about this in previous lessons. Which ones are going to go outside the radical? So we know that this is going to go outside the radical. This is going to go outside the radical. So I will have 2, and then that's a 2, and that's I square root of 2. 2 times 2 is 4, I square root of 2. So in other words, I can say that square root of negative 32 is 4i square root of 2. And that is your answer for this one. It's really not hard. It's just all you need to do, just try to break it down so that you don't get any steps wrong. All right. Let's go ahead and do example 4. Example 4 is going to have this little something a little bit different. Well, it's the same concept as all things you've learned. There shouldn't be anything surprising. Well, let's do, yeah, I got negative 2 square root of, let's see, let's try negative 48. So I got negative on the outside and negative on the inside. I don't care about that negative. That negative is not going to tell me anything. That is the negative that's going to tell me that, oh, I'm going to have an imaginary number because I have a negative inside the square root. So I will have negative 2, and this one is negative 1 times square root of 48. 48, I like to do it in the margin here. Okay, we're gonna go with smallest number I can divide 48 with is 2. That's 24. 2, that's 12. 2, 6, 2, 3, and 3, 1. So in other words, 48 is the same as we're grouping in groups of 2. And why is it groups of 2? Because we're looking for the square root. So it's 2 squared times 2 squared times 3. So I'm going to say negative 2, that drops down. This square root of negative I is, square root of negative 1 is I. And then this one is going to be 2 squared times 2 squared times 3. Okay, so now I'm going to drop it down, negative 2i. This is going to go outside the radical as 2. This will go outside the radical as another 2. And then what's going to be left inside the radical? 3. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to multiply 2 times 2 times 2, and that would be 8. So we're going to drop down the negative. 8i square root of 3. So negative 2 square root of negative 48 is the same as negative 8i square root of 3. And that is your answer. I'm going to do one more example, and it's going to be the you try part. And this is going to be the last thing we're going to do for this specific uh, concept, but we're going to move on to something more operational. So example 5, please try it on your own. So if I have, so pause the video, negative 3 square root of negative 32. We do 32. We did 32. Let's do 38. All right. So let's see here. Again, we think of negative 3 times square root of negative 1 times square root of negative 3. We can't do the negative 38, but it's okay. I'm sorry, positive 38. So that would be, can I do the square root of 38? Let's see. 2, 19, 19, 1. So 38 is the same as 19 times 2. So I'm going to do negative 3 is going to be dropped down. I'm sorry. Negative 1 is going to be an I. And this is going to stay as 38. So the answer of negative 3 square root of negative 38 is negative 3i square root of 38. And it's as simple as that. I hope you guys got this lesson. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comment or you can email me. All right, you guys have a good one.